Hello everyone, welcome back to WB Blacksmithing. Today we're going to forge a one-piece rose. Not the most realistic or fancy, but it works. People seem to like them. I have 1/4 by 1 inch flat stock at 9 inches long. That's just how I like to make them. It gives me the right size. And you'll see how I make them pretty dang soon, because that's what this video is about. I'll go in for my first heat. I'm over at my small anvil, by the way, because I like the square corners, machined flat face for doing this set down with half on, half off blows. If you don't know what that means, eventually I'll probably make a video about it, or there's multiple good videos about it out there already. But just doing a bit of a set down so I have a bit of a transition from my petals to my stem, because the stem obviously has to be smaller than the rest of the flower, like normal. Usually I'd use the press to speed up this process. I usually do the set down between the petals and the stem on the anvil, and then I just draw out the rest of the stem with the press. But I wanted to do it by hand because, for one, you shouldn't need a press for this project, and two, I just didn't want to include that in this video because of reason one. Now we're just going in another heat, drawing it out more. This is a 4.5 pound hammer, by the way, about there. I forged it, so it's not exact, but still on the small anvil because of the reasons that I just mentioned. Also, I have a hardy tool for this anvil, and we're going to need a hardy tool pretty soon, so I figured I'd just work on this anvil to do the stem. There we go. And here I wanted to show another method to drawing out. It's a bit faster in general. This anvil doesn't have a very rounded horn. It actually started out as a square horn with a flat top, but I rounded out the corners or the edges. So, yep, just working it, turning it 90 degrees so both directions get drawn out, not just the width, or not just the whatever, the other dimension. Anyway, so that way it stays square and doesn't turn into flat stock, basically. Or turn back into flat stock. I want to keep it square so I can round it out efficiently and have a nice rounded stem. I don't round them perfectly because I like to have a bit more of an organic look to them, and I'll show you that pretty soon whenever we get to rounding this out and finishing up the stem. But you'll see what I mean. There we go. Next heat. And now we're on the flat again. Just planishing off the sides, drawing it out a tiny bit more. Right now I'm doing the first half of the stem that's closest to what will be the flower petals. Making sure it gets nice and squared off before rounding, so I don't have any weird cold shuts or marks or anything in the finished product. There you go. Now we'll do the second half of the stem. I just do it like half and half on the stem because it's easier to get a heat and rounded in one heat if you do half of the stem at a time. It's hard to do like a 10-inch stem in one heat whenever you're trying to planish it and round it and everything else. There you go. Straighten it out a bit. You can see it's forged pretty cleanly. We'll just start rounding this out. I did the first half already, so I'm just showing you the second. So what you really do is just knock the corners off and then round out between the flat parts that are left over after that. I like to use a smaller hammer because it allows me to use quick and steadier hammer blows for such a small piece of steel. It's about 2 pounds. And there's the organic-ish shape that I was telling you about. Now we'll just make sure it's all clean with this heat here. Basically a round, plainish job is what we're doing. But I'm still not making it perfect. If I wanted to make it really, really round and clean, I would probably just use a spring swage, or probably that. So then I'd have a top and bottom swage and make it really nice and round. But I don't like that for my flowers. It doesn't look natural to really have a clean, kind of shiny stem. And there's that. I also like to put a bit of curvature in the stems so they don't look perfectly straight. That way they look a bit more natural in that way. And there's the Hardy tool I forged in a video about half a year ago, I believe. But that's not really important. It's not perfect. It's not a great Hardy tool or anything. But here I'm marking where I want to cut. It doesn't have to be exact in my opinion. I just do random lengths that look good. But I start out at the end, farthest away from the stem, with a longer bit, and then progressively make this petal section smaller. Now we'll do the first few cuts. I don't want to try to cut these whenever it's pretty cold, because don't want to blunt my Hardy tool, which is a hot cut tool, so I don't want to make it blunted. Then I have to sharpen it again. And it's not exactly hard. It's basically low to medium carbon steel. You can see how I cut that. Now I do the last two. You can make more petals and you can make a longer stem. Do whatever you want. I've done them differently before, but for most of them I just use this, pretty much this dimension. And you might ask, why do we need to use a hot cut or a Hardy tool? Well, the way that it spreads out the petals really helps for the finishing of the rose. You can use an angle grinder or anything else really, probably, but I like to do it this way because it just makes it a lot easier for me, in my opinion. But now we're on the bigger anvil. I don't need any of the square edges or anything, or the Hardy tools or whatever. So now we'll just work the petals. I start out with the smallest petal nearest to the stem. It just is easier to get a heat on the outside of the bar than the inside, and I'd rather just work the inside first. So I'm trying to heat out the outside, and it has already been made thinner by working it like this. I'll probably end up with a melted petal or two, and that's not really good. So I just work the inside with the smaller bits, and then I go the outside. I'm flattening it. Working it on one side with the cross peen hammer usually makes the rest of the bar raise up. There we go. I like to leave the texturing that the cross peen gives. You can remove it, planish it out, whatever. It's your roses, but this is how I do most of mine. There we go. Right now I'm just bending the stem where it needs to go, which is about 90 degrees in relation to the smallest petal, or whatever petal's nearest to the stem. Because then we need to start rolling the petals around each other to make our rose. Now we'll start rolling it around. If you've ever rolled a barrel for a hinge, you'll know how to do this really, just in a different place on the steel, in different shapes of steel. But it's basically the same thing. You just got to round it out pretty carefully, make sure it's really round, make sure it's tight where it needs to be tight, and just get it around itself. And you really, because if you don't round the petals out as you work them and bend them around each other, it's hard to get them rounded once they're all around each other. If the center ones are not very round, it usually tries to get into a triangular shaped rose head, and that isn't really good looking to me. Again, you can do them however you want, but this is how I do mine. Usually I do use a wooden block with a I just use a normal brush like you would get for welding, a steel wire brush. But I'm just rounding out the rest of the flower petals, making sure they go around each other nice and tight and round. You can see there. Got the flower almost rounded out. Didn't show you the last bit because I was working on the heel, which is off camera. It's just a bit easier to work there. Didn't want to move the camera area and tripod and whatever else around. By area I mean view, by the way. I don't know why I said area, but that's weird. Anyways, there we go. Just about a finished rose. This is how I like to do mine. I sell them for 25 bucks. You can sell them for more or less if people will buy them. I don't really care very much, honestly. It's your stuff, your own work. I just wanted to show you how I do these. There we go. I like them to all turn out differently a little bit. But thanks for watching and subscribing. I'll see you guys next time. And I have a bonus clip for you real quick. Rob Garman, this one is for you, the face that I'm about to make. That way you can sleep better at night. I remember your comment. But here's a knife that I forged. Some of you might have seen it on Instagram. It has a serpent engraved into it. It's a blacksmith's knife, basically. Pretty thick little knife. But